Hello, my name is Heather Hughes. I am Trust Lead Professional for Humanities, and this afternoon I am going to be talking with you about effective feedback. Now, to do that, I'm going to just share with you a presentation. There we go. Let's put it onto slide. And really, the aim of this afternoon is to get you to have a think about how can we make feedback hopefully more effective, because it's something that takes up a lot of our time, a lot of our efforts. So you might want to press pause, and you could press pause at any point during this and just have a bit of a think. So here's my question: why do we give feedback? It takes up so much of our time. It's probably the one of the biggest contributions to a teacher's workload. So why do we give it? What do we want from it? Even if you think it's obvious, just humour me, have a bit of a think. So as I say, if you want to press pause, now would be the time to do it. Well, this is, I suppose, the basics. It's this idea that it gives us the chance to judge our students' level of understanding, their skills, before then planning on how we move them to achieving the next set of learning intentions or the next set of goals. The EEF have put it perhaps a little bit in a bit more detail, that feedback is information given to the learner about their performance relative to the goals, to the outcomes that we want them to be achieving, and that it should aim to or be capable of producing improvement in students' learning, that it redirects, it refocuses their actions to achieve that goal by aligning effort and activity with an outcome. The EF goes a little bit further, and they did a lot of research about, well, what is the impact? Well, the impact is very high, and for a low cost. And their argument is that written feedback has around 5 months additional progress on a student. Oral or verbal feedback has a typical impact, positive impact, of a little bit more of 7 months. So if we can talk to them, we get 2 months extra of positivity, I guess. So to sum this up, we've got greater impact at primary schools. Primary students seem more responsive to when staff give them feedback. The effects are high across all curriculum subjects, although maths and science do see a slightly higher positive impact. I think this one was particularly interesting to me, was when I started to do this research about for this CPD, is that our lower attaining students benefit more from explicit feedback than our higher. And I think that's certainly something that to think about, is like, how are we differentiating basically our feedback? Are we making sure that they understand it? And then finally, that while digital is the way forward, digital transformation that our schools have been going through, it actually has a slightly smaller impact at something like 4 months than some of the others. Now, saying that, I am going to touch on using digital as one form of feedback. There was some studies have been done, some numbers, some statistics, and it was found that the timeliness of feedback changes depending on whether we're a primary or a secondary. Primary is more timely, they get them back more quickly, but secondary is more detailed, and that's why it takes sometimes a little bit longer to get our feedback back to our students, because it takes us longer to produce it. I think the one thing, however, and this is something that as secondary teachers we need to be aware of, is there is a drop-off with secondary students in acknowledging written feedback. And so in the study that was done, 49% of respondents stated that students had actually moved on in their learning by the time the feedback had been acted on or reviewed or even read. So therefore, as a result, that piece of work is no longer at the top of our students' minds. And therefore there is a lack of motivation to act upon it. Well, I don't need that now. We've moved on because this was the other week. And so when we're thinking about feedback, we've got to start thinking about, well, be genuine. How quickly can we get it back to our students? Sensibly, how quickly can we get it back? Because that is going to impact on it. And therefore, someone's like, well, is it worth, have we got to think about what we're giving feedback on? Because the practicalities of actually getting it done and back to our students. So this session is partly theory, partly practical ideas. So this is a bit of theory, and it comes from John Hattie. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about him. He's the visible learning sort of guru. He's best known for large-scale data analysis, gets loads of data, crunches the numbers, and sort of breaks it down. Back in 2007, he looked at effective feedback and how he argued effective feedback is basically broken into 4 different levels. First level is self. These are non-specific comments that are directed at the student and not the task. The second level is task orientated. So we're providing comments on how well they've accomplished whatever it is the task is that we set. The third one is process. And this idea that the comments are specific to the processes that underlie the task. So not the actual finished bit, but what they were doing during it. And then finally, self-regulation. And this is where feedback supports them in monitoring and regulating their actions. So the onus is really shifted onto them. So with this in mind, we fast forward and Hattie to 2021. Students were given different types of feedback. So they were given like samples, and then they were asked about their views on it. Overwhelmingly, self-level feedback was not at all respected or appreciated by students. They felt that it was not helping them. It was directed at them. It wasn't giving the information they needed, the guidance they needed to improve the actual physical work. Not useful then. Doesn't help me. Okay. Other forms of feedback, much better. So there's various sort of levels, various statistics. So majority, something like sort of nearly 60% argued that task level feedback is effective. At 48% said process level feedback is effective. And about 45% said that layer of self-regulation where we're giving them the onus, they saw that as useful. But overwhelmingly, self no. Okay. My character is not gonna, you commenting on my character is not gonna help me. I need to know about the process. That's what I need to do. So feedback strategies. So these strategies are what I've looked at. Some I've used, some I've looked at and seen online. So hopefully you'll find something of use in here. So as I say, the theory is we can't comment necessarily on character. We've got to provide it in very different ways, much more sort of looking at the task, looking at the process. So whole class feedback. So this idea is not new. It's been knocking around for a few years. It was very much brought out, and one of the things that was sold as initially was about the reduction in workload for teachers. Workload is very important, I think, when it comes to feedback, partly because of the time it takes up and the value that the students get from it. It does reduce staff workload, and it certainly allows us to provide a more responsive sort of approach to our teaching and to our classroom practice. Misconceptions can be easily spotted when you're looking at the whole class sort of performance on a particular piece of work or particular activity. And this idea that it's a more granular way, you can look really at quite sort of small points and really start to think about that needs to be developed. I need to take that. So it's a much more analytical way of feedback. It can create a lot more understanding of where a class needs to be moving towards. But with everything that I share with you this afternoon, there are caveats. Of course, there are. Individuals aren't getting their specific feedback, and for some of our students, they will not like that. And so if it was a form of feedback that you're going to give whole class, you really need to explain it to them. You need to explain to them the benefits and why you're going to be doing it. And I would say that about any form of feedback. I think we're very good at teaching our subjects, hopefully, and we're very good at sharing like success criterias and learning outcomes. But I think sometimes we need to say, look, this is why I'm giving you the feedback the way I am. This will help you because. And I think engagement can increase. What we don't want as well is a generalised sort of approach, so that that close level feedback isn't being hit, and what we're providing is more generalised, and that's really not going to be helpful to anybody. The best way, it could be argued, that you're going to get whole class feedback to help your students is to blend it with other approaches. Particularly what I'm going to move on to, which is live marking, something that at Aldridge we've been now doing for, or at least sort of this academic year last and moving into this year. And I think you'll see why whole class feedback and live marking can be sort of useful bedfellows. So live marking, your movement around the classroom is really, really important. Now I've shared with you on the screen, I took a screenshot from Miss Begum, who's on Twitter, or X, if you want to call it that now. And it's the process that she uses at her school. A couple of things: slop, brilliant; shed loads of practice. And swivel that you'll see on there, that refers to, from Doug Lemoff, this idea of scanning and checking that the students are doing what you've asked them to do. And so what you'll see there is a very clear structure that she uses at her school to get you thinking about it. Now, live marking, timely, specific, immediate acknowledgement. You know, students get that immediate response because you're moving around, you've spotted something, you're talking to them about it. They can make immediate changes. So it certainly can reduce down your workload. But, and this is really, really important, if you are going to adopt live marking, as we have, your planning of the lesson will need to take that into account, because time can be eaten up very quickly with you trying to get around the classroom, with you trying to provide feedback to students. So you need to really start thinking about, how am I going to start planning my lessons, taking into account that I am sort of almost pulling out of it. I'm the facilitator, yes, but I'm going to be moving around. I'm going to be checking. I'm going to be asking. I'm going to be pushing. I'm going to be prompting. So how is my lesson planning going to reflect that? And I think that's something you really need to think about. But it certainly has that answer to, particularly in secondary school setting, that we don't give feedback quickly enough. QR codes, I said I do a little bit of digital. So QR codes can reduce workload. I have it on good authority that speaking is 7 times faster than either writing or typing, and that it can be really personalised to that particular student, and students will engage with that. You know, the fact that it's personalised to them is really important. But then there's also the spin-offs. So you've provided that QR code, but on the QR code, yes, there's your comments, but there's also a link to a waggle. So what a good one looks like. There's a link to an exemplar. There's a link to a website or a video clip that, again, is going to improve that piece of work, was going to give them an idea of where they could be taking it. So it's sort of it's a whole different level, in a way, of feedback that you could provide if you chose something like this. It can be stored, the feedback you provide. It could be accessed again in the future. I think the last sort of strength there that's bullet pointed, I think this is a brilliant one. Think about the first time a student attempts something, and it might be a bit ropey, a little bit wobbly. And then think about later when they're either using the same skill or they're returning to something and their answer is better. because they've improved either through time, through practice, through maturity, and you get to remind them of that. Look where you were, look where you are. If you've got a student who's having doubts or is getting a bit down, isn't that brilliant that you say, look, I can actually show you in detail, get your code, look where we've gone. Now you could say, well, yeah, but you could do that from a written comment in a book. You could, but that book might have been from the start of year 10 and now we're in year 11. But because this is stored somewhere else, you can give the student that sort of that push of confidence. And I think that's a really useful tool for particularly for motivation. Be aware though. We make these assumptions everyone's got a mobile phone, or some of us do, and they don't, or they don't have internet connection. And so we need to bear that in mind. It could possibly, if you're expecting them to use the codes at home and because of various issues they can't, it could possibly increase that gap between our disadvantaged and non-disadvantaged students. So we do need to bear that in mind. And secondly, if you're going to use them in the classroom, are they looking at your comments or are they sending a cheeky message to somebody? So we need to think about, do we trust them to be using their phone sensibly? And there's no reason why they shouldn't. But perhaps as well, what about the kids who've used up all their data? What about the kids who drop their phone? What about the kids who don't have a mobile? Or if we're setting this as something they're going to look at home, have they got internet connection? And I think that's really something we need to be very, very careful around for obvious reasons. Now, this is very different in that it's proper old school. You can see there an example photograph I took of it. Keep it, bin it, build it. So this can be used for self-feedback, for peer feedback, for teacher feedback, and it is very much centered around the idea of what was the criteria for this piece of work. And so it is very, very specific. And the idea is you'll have a piece of work and you would be looking, and if you were marking it, you say, right, that bit is brilliant. That's spot on to what I wanted you to do. So you give it the keep it colour. This bit, no. Bin it colour. This bit, and I'm talking as a history teacher, you could have took this a little bit further. You've given me some brilliant facts, but you haven't explained it. You haven't linked it back. You haven't given me the mini conclusion. Build on this. So with this, what you get is the idea of developing not just what you give, but encouraging the students to start thinking about how they could be providing feedback either to themselves or to their own colleagues, to peers. It reduces down our workload and it makes them perhaps a little bit more responsible. And it makes both you and them really think through, what does the completed work need to have before I even start? So that the feedback becomes more about, I'm going to keep it, that keep it colour. And some students get really, really sort of competitive. I want more keep it colour. I want more keep it colour. So it's thinking before we start. And it really makes us as teachers, when we're planning, think about what is the criteria, what's the success criteria looking like here, so that the students know exactly what they should be aiming for. We have to be careful though, particularly if we're going to be giving them the opportunity for feedback. The criteria has got to be absolutely explicit in their heads. They get it. Otherwise, it's not going to be as accurate as it should be. And the other thing is that we need to bear in mind that while they might be able to identify what needs to, for example, be built upon, or they might identify what needs to be binned, they might not be able to know how they've got to do it. So it's all about finding it, but what do I do next? So it doesn't provide all the answers, but I think it is a very useful strategy. It's a very useful technique where you've got, you know, 3 things going on. What am I looking for to make better? What am I looking for to get rid of? And what am I looking for that's really, really good? I'm really, really pleased with it. Staying with highlighters, we have got this idea, highlighted feedback. So a little bit of overlap to what I've just talked about, but this is about providing a key. The idea is we're putting more responsibility onto them. We're showing them where there is a need for, a bit like, as I said, the last one. But this is a bit more detail. So maybe this is better than the last one. I don't know. This idea about, well, I'm going to give you some improved suggestions. So rather than sitting again, build upon this. Oh, right. So instead of writing it every single time on a child's book, or you know, half a dozen times in student books, this might be on the board. So the kids are looking up. Oh, right, okay, and they've got those prompts, so they're not just sat there going, I've identified where I need to improve, but I don't know how to do it. And I know some students would go, look, if I didn't know how to do it the first time, how am I suddenly going to have the answer now, miss? So it's this idea of, well, let's give you some nudges in the right direction. Well, now you've got to do something with it. So we do have to be careful that they might not immediately understand specifically what they need to add. And here lies the other issue we need to be aware of, us. We might start writing further comments, and then that defeats the purpose of this activity completely. So we need to be really careful that we don't end up creating more work for ourselves and reducing what we expect from our students. Because I think I've noticed that I really do believe that we need to be making our students more thoughtful, more engaged, more active with their work. You know, they should be working harder than perhaps sometimes that they are, and making them be more independent and more sort of thinking through how am I, you know, this idea of being their self-editor, that they're looking at their work, how can I make this better? ABC feedback is an idea that was originally set up to structure peer marking, peer feedback, but it can be tweaked to help structure feedback from staff, from teachers. It has some links, some similarities to the second, third, and fourth levels that I mentioned earlier that John Hattie talked about. So sort of processes and tasks and self-regulatory work when we're looking at feedback. So the idea is that we provide feedback in a very structured manner. So A is for the action. So this focuses on what did the student do and how does it compare to the success criteria. You notice the success criteria has been really cropping up a lot in this session. But I think it's a way of really keeping ourselves honed when we're providing feedback, or the kids are providing feedback to themselves or to others. Now, if we're going to allow it to be peered, the student shares the feedback with their colleague. Obviously, if it's us, we would be sharing that feedback. Then the B for because. This step focuses on why the action needs to take place. Now, this might be a bit different for some of us. So instead of just saying, you need to add this, we're going, you need to add this because this could be conversational. It could be the verbal that we started with, you know, the more successful way of providing, the more effective way of providing feedback. But the because is really, really important. If they understand why, they're more likely to do it. Like most of us, you know, if someone says, do this, you go, do this because, so I think there's definitely something there. And the C focuses on them brainstorming ideas, identifying possible solutions. Now, for students who we perhaps think are particularly weak, and we go, but they're not going to be able to do that, it might be you provide some prompts or some prompt words, or you start them off. But there really should be a pullback as well, that they are being more responsible for this part. So you said, right, this is the action you need to do because it will blah, blah, blah. So what are you going to do? Come on. Generate some ideas. Let's have a, let's have a think through. Jot these ideas down. Tell me these ideas. Whatever, however you want to structure this. The strengths are, it can lead to really specific feedback from us and from them. You want it to go that way. And it really, particularly because of the C for could we, it really makes them engage. They can't do the could we if they haven't engaged with the A for action and the B for because. They will not get it. And so it really makes them sort of buy into what you're giving them. However, again, it's this idea that be strict with yourself. Don't start adding further written comments because you think it's of use to them. That defeats the purpose. We're trying to reduce our workload. We're trying to think smart. And also, as well, is that thing that the more you write, the more the kids turn off. The more red pen, the more like, I can't be bothered. So we have to be very careful that we don't sort of feel that we're overcompensating, that we're not giving them enough, because we are. And this is my final one. My final idea is focus feedback. And this is when we are really, really, really thoughtful about which bit of feedback we're going to provide. And we only provide feedback on that, and nothing else whatsoever is going to be considered. Nothing else is going to have a red mark next to it. So for some of us, we have to be very careful that, this is weird. We're not, no. One thing, one focus for that particular activity with that class. And the idea is that the student can then resubmit work. I'll mention a little bit more about that in a moment. This gives students a greater clarity on what they have and they haven't accomplished in relation to a very specific strand of a success criteria. The second point on the strengths, I think this is really quite a sort of an important thing to bear in mind. A lot of us, with our lesson planning and the resources that we're making for our students, has been taken into account this idea of not overloading them with metacognitively. Well, have we thought about that when we give feedback? I'll be honest, not necessarily the case. In the past, I've always felt I'm shortchanging the student if I don't, provide lots and lots of feedback. And well, no, you might actually be making them feel like they're drowning under too much information, particularly if you've started something that's new or you're looking at something that's really quite sophisticated or complex. We all have topics we know that are difficult. So by bombarding them, are we actually helping them? Taking a particular strand, using our knowledge, using our understanding. I know this is an area that I've got to get right with this class. And I'm only going to provide feedback on that. Can really reduce down that sort of metacognitive overload stress that some of our students, a lot of our students actually, can suffer from. Misconceptions. So it is a very quick way of dealing with a misconception. If that's the particular focus that you've been looking at, and they get that very clear feedback, they're very aware of it, it's highly unlikely. It'd be really odd if they continued with that misconception. Ownership. So if we added the resubmitting idea, that they look at it, they act on it, they resubmit it, the ownership's really on them. So I've done something, you've told me about this, right, I'm going to make it better now, I'm going to do something different. A bit like the idea of C, could you add something more? There is an obvious benefit from students resubmitting work. And if we get them into that mindset, they don't go, oh, I've got to do it again. Mindset is, I could make this really a lot better. And that's a really cool thing. But we need to bear in mind that timing and workload, are you going to mark that? If so, that doubles your marking. Have you got the time? Because you're worried about your get through your curriculum, your schemes of work. So you need to think carefully. Now, my idea would be, I'm not going to do that on every single piece of work. But there are particular points within a unit where I think I want to use that. I want to use that because I've introduced something new. And I think, from my experience, the students find that quite complicated. And I'm going to focus in on one thing. I'm going to get that one thing really right. They're going to resubmit their works and be bang on. But I'm not going to do that next time I look at feedback. I'm going to do something else. It might be my whole class feedback. It might be me keep it, bin it, build it. So what I would say is this has got a lot of merit, obviously. So obviously, I think it has. So the idea would be then is that you say, well, I don't want to do this. I mean, if you could do it every time, that's great. But what I'm trying to provide is sort of a balance of what we know is good and right and true, a bit like our motto, but also that is something that we can actually achieve and that we can achieve for, in some cases, many classes that we teach over a week or over a fortnight. So I think, we need to bear that in mind. So blending, like I said earlier, we've got the live marking and we've got the whole class and they can be blended together. I think some of these could be blended together and you could actually identify that piece of work would really benefit from that kind of feedback. And that's something else to think about when we look at our schemes of work and we look at how we provide feedback. Is there a case to be made for that is going to receive that sort of feedback because that will really have a benefit? So perhaps even looking at, well, I'm going to mark on there for that, perhaps as a subject leader, if you're a subject leader, right, that activity or that piece of work is an opportunity to learn this. To do that, this type of feedback is going to be used, and it's marked on. So your staff know, all right, yeah, and hopefully they understand, and the kids understand as well. Oh, I'm going to get that sort of feedback because it's going to give me that. It works better. If we can understand why things are going on, then obviously the buy-in is there. So what I would say is that stop sharing. The sort of the takeaways from this afternoon is I don't think there is one particular form of feedback that we have to use. I think there's a range. I think we have to be sensible that our students understand why we're introducing these types of feedback and when. I think we need to be honest about what is sustainable in a really busy environment that is secondary school teaching. I think that there is definite merit in thinking about, are there opportunities where particular forms of feedback would work better? And perhaps, having that chance to have a discussion with your colleagues, discussion with your teams about, we think a lot about what we teach, we think a lot about where we put our assessments, increasingly perhaps we're thinking more about how we structure homeworks, etc., etc. Do we think about the feedback side of it? Or we certainly have conversations about moderation and standardization, but do we actually think about the type of feedback and why it would work in this particular sort of piece of this particular activity? And I think there is a useful conversation to have there. It might well be that you wanted to watch this and you sort of hopefully press pause occasionally. I'm sure there's lots of other brilliant ideas. These are just 7. And I wanted to make this a bit more practical. But I'm sure there's some brilliant feedback ideas out there, and hopefully we'll get to we hear about them as we sort of grow as a mat. So hopefully this afternoon's been really useful to you. Thank you very much for signing up to this, and good luck with your feedback. And remember that we're doing this to identify areas and gaps in our students' knowledge, but also we're trying to get them further on and also engaging with what we're doing with them. Thank you very much.